A playful fight escalates into serious violence and causes long-standing frustrations to erupt at Lincoln High in southeastern San Diego. Whether San Diego is ruled by Democrats or Republicans is at stake in the subtly crowded race for City Council District 1. And the reasons behind California's dismal voter turnout in recent years and why some become super voters while others shun electoral politics entirely. I'm Mark Sauer. The KPBS Roundtable starts now. Welcome to our discussion of the week's top stories. I'm Mark Sauer. And joining me at the KPBS Roundtable today, our education reporter Mario Coran of Voice of San Diego. Hi, Mario.
Hey, Mark.
Good to have you back again. City Hall reporter David Garrick of the San Diego Union Tribune. Hi, David.
Hi, Mark.
Glad you're here today. And KPBS Speak City Heights reporter Megan Burks. Hi, Megan.
Hi, Mark.
We're glad you're here today. Well, it started as what's described as a playful thing, a slap fight between classes that was a regular occurrence at Lincoln High School. But things escalated, and now the incident late last month has brought long-standing tensions to the surface at the troubled school in southeastern San Diego. Mario, what is this slap fight? It's kind of a lighthearted clowning thing that apparently got out of hand here?
Yeah, that's apparently what it sounds like. I mean, it sounds like there was a group of kids that would play slap fighting games every day around lunchtime. Well, I don't know if it happened every day, but I know it happened, or I've heard it happened a couple times the week of the brawl, or whatever other term we want to slap on it. But yeah, it sounded like there was kids playfully fighting in the quad around lunchtime. One thing led to another, kind of got escalated. Police officer Bashir Abdi.
He kind of stepped in and got involved in this thing, right?
Right. He stepped in, got involved in it, and that's when it sort of escalated even further from there.
Okay. And we're going to get to some of the details on what happened there and all. I did want to point out, though, there is a security video. Other than some cell phone stuff and all, there's a security video of what took place, but that hasn't been made public. Why not?
That's correct. So right now the video is in the custody, I guess is the right word for it, of the district attorney. The district attorney is not allowing that footage to be released. That could sort of clear up some of the confusion about what led to what and what, who punched the officer first. Did the officer tase the student before he was punched? So the surveillance video could clear that up. But
the sequence of events and what may have actually happened.
Exactly.
And there's reasons. We've talked before in the show and other incidents about videos and why DAs and police are reluctant to release them. Sometimes they get released and court orders them, etc. We'll see what happens in this case. There was a call, though, to release that video. Who wants it released at this point?
So soon after the fight ensued and then it was broken up, I think in the day following, Cindy Martin called for that video to be released.
Superintendent of schools, yeah.
Superintendent Cindy Martin called for that video to be released promptly. She sort of spoke too soon, it looks like. District Attorney Bonnie DeMonis put the halt to that and said nothing's going to be released until our investigation is concluded or until further notice.
And the NAACP and some students at the school and other folks
NAACP also called for that to be quickly released. Doesn't look like that's going to happen.
All right, let's look at a little closer at this confrontation between the officer, Bashir Abdi, and this student, Jesse Duncan. How old is this student?
Do you know, Megan?
I don't recall.
I think it's 16 or 17, right?
Yeah, I want to say 17,
okay.
But...
so this is from prosecutors, because there's a court case now, and reporters have been allowed into juvenile court to hear some of the details. So what's the prosecutor saying, the events here, just the thumbnail on that?
So what the prosecutors are saying is that after there was a slap fight that Bashir Abdi arrived on the scene, helped break it up, students sort of dispersed. At that point, one student, his name is Brendan Duncan, I'm sorry,
Jesse Duncan.
Jesse Duncan.
Right, the son. Another angle of the story.
All right, so Jesse Duncan at one point went into the parking garage. Bashir Abdi, the school police officer, followed him in there, and there was a confrontation. Resulted in one student being tased, Bashir Abdi being punched multiple times, including in the head, so he was injured after that. And
some charges now have stemmed from that encounter, right?
Sure, there was... So Duncan is charged with 4 counts of assault on the police officer. I might butcher the words, but great bodily injury, resisting arrest is also included in there.
Okay, as a result of that. And then what happened to Abdi, the school police officer?
So Abdi is last I've heard, is still on leave. He'd had some injuries. Prosecutors said he was wheelchair bound after the incident. He had some nerve damage, they reported. So he had he was missing some feeling in his arm. And as of now, I believe he hasn't returned to work. He has also just recently filed a lawsuit against the students who allegedly punched him. So lawsuit, he actually filed a complaint, the precursor to a lawsuit, but interestingly, he's suing the students as opposed to the district.
Yeah, they can amend that, but that is odd at this point, so it's a lawsuit is in the works. So now he's a San Diego Unified police officer. It's a separate police force of armed officers in San Diego schools.
Right.
I don't know if a lot of people realize that. Tell us a little bit about this force. Why are these officers there? And it's not every school district in the country has this, right?
Right. So we don't think a lot about school police officers until something like this happens. And then we're sort of jolted into realizing that there are real police officers on campus. So yes, these are real police officers. They have the same powers and authorities. The San Diego Unified commissions its own police department. They go through the academy, and then they're trained. The district trains them, and they're armed. They come to school.
And they're there every day and involved.
And the taser, they have guns
David?
as well?
Sure, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do they have pepper spray with them? I know, I believe some of the students were pepper sprayed after the incident at Lincoln.
Yeah, so they have tasers, we know for sure, because one student was tasered. They have pepper spray. So just one side point on that, there's been a call from the community to release the video, and there are reasons why that video isn't being released yet. But there are also some very basic things that the district could say about when and why its officers use tasers or pepper spray.
So explain the guidelines and what the situations are.
Right, and so far they've refused to release that.
Okay.
I've asked questions on that.
Other reporters
have filed public records requests for those guidelines and have yet to get anything back.
Right. Let's focus for a moment on Lincoln High itself. It goes back. It was called one of the more segregated schools by a judge many years ago. Sure. It's even Cindy Martin, the superintendent, has characterized Lincoln as the heart of the struggle in America. What does she mean by that? What are some of the troubles there?
Right. So exactly, Lincoln's been sort of a lightning rod as far back as 1977, when a judge determined that it was one of the schools that was minority isolated. Not much has changed in terms of segregation and racially isolated students, but it's still got that perception around it. And I think what Cindy Martin was getting at when she said something to the effect of, when we get Lincoln right, we get schools in America.
We get America right.
We get America right. Is that Lincoln is just one example of a school where all these issues of all these protracted problems of poverty and the question of how do you turn a school around that's just been that's losing enrollment, that's struggling to get its academics up. How do you reverse the trend at a high poverty school? And so I think what she means is when she gets an answer to that, apply it to other schools
and other communities. Let's talk a minute about the numbers here. They're really pulling kids out of that school in droves. Many parents are sending them elsewhere, right?
Yeah, right.
Talk about the numbers there. I've got, if you don't have them in front of me, it looks like they're down from 2,300 enrollment in 2007 just down to 1,450 this year, according to
So Lincoln's a huge school. I mean, when they opened it in 2007, it was a brand new campus, $129 million campus. It has room for, I believe, 1,700 or 2,700 students, right? So now, with enrollment at around 1,400, parents are fleeing that. It's one of the schools in San Diego Unified that parents avoid most. All right. So when they start out in the cluster, when they start out going to school, kids go to kindergarten in the neighborhood. By the time they get to high school, they're going to other neighborhoods for a better school.
Now, we got just a minute left on this topic, but you interviewed Lachey Collins about the fight and how slap fighting is handled at Lincoln. Who is she and what did she have to say?
So Lachey Collins is vice president of the African American Educators Association. She's also a staff member for Assemblywoman Shirley Weber, and she's running for school board to represent this area. So to Lachey Collins, this sort of crystallizes, this whole situation crystallizes all these underlying issues that we haven't dealt with. And one of those issues is that students, parents in that school, in those neighborhoods, just feel a disconnection and a lack of representation that needs to be addressed, whether it's the district officials, the school board member representing that area, or just strong leadership
at the school. And where's the principal been in all this?
The principal has been there. He's been quiet, has deferred questions to the public spokesperson. I've heard that he's been taking meetings one-on-one with students, but yeah, hasn't been like a public figure leading this conversation by any means.
All right. Well, there'll be a lot to follow up on this, I'm sure, and we'll hear a lot more from the community, and look forward to your stories on that. We're going to move on. The voting in one San Diego council district could determine whether Democrats or Republicans take control of the council. Councilwoman Sherri Lightner is termed out in District 1, and the race to replace her just got pretty crowded. Davis, start by just placing this for us. Where is District 1 and what community?
It's a north coastal area. La Jolla is the centerpiece of it, but it also includes Carmel Valley and University City and areas up there, everything north of Pacific Beach.
All right, and there had been two main candidates to replace Lightner before the last deadline to file here, and she's a moderate Democrat. Who were those two main candidates?
Yeah, it was going to be a head-to-head battle between Barbara Bree, who is a tech entrepreneur. She's a Democrat. And then Ray Ellis, who is also a businessman. He's from Carmel Valley, and Bree is from La Jolla. And it was a Democrat versus a Republican.
And Ray Ellis, no stranger. He's run before.
He lost to Lightner in 2012.
All right. Now, all this changed, as we said at the outset here, with the filing deadline, and suddenly, pull up the bus. We got a whole bunch of candidates up there.
It could be old-fashioned, backroom politics. Some say it's a hard question to answer because we haven't been able to get anyone to say anything on the record at the moment.
All right, but let's start with who are these new folks now? One of them is Sherri Lightner's husband.
One of them is Sherri Lightner's husband. So instead of Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton, it's a reversal on the gender thing, where you have Sherri Lightner is termed out, and her husband Bruce Lightner is going to run.
In different parties.
He's a different party. Yes, he's a Republican as well. Sherri's a moderate Democrat, but it is a flippin' party for sure. And then a staffer in Lightner's office is also going to run. His name is Kyle Haskala. And then another interesting candidate is Louis Rodolico from University City. Now, he probably doesn't have a lot of chance to win, but he'll probably get a lot of votes because he's a one-issue candidate on a bridge that's very controversial in University City.
Okay, and that bridge up on Regents Road,
Regents
if I
Road,
recall.
exactly,
Yeah,
yes.
okay.
And so some folks will come out and vote for him, which the whole point of this is whether there's going to be a runoff or not.
Okay.
Way City Council.
Yeah, explain the rules on that.
Yeah, the way
How does that
City
work?
Council elections operate is that if anybody gets 50% of the vote in the June primary, then it's over. But if no one manages to get 50% of the vote, then the top two vote getters have a runoff in November. And if you made the argument that this was a political ploy, you would argue that the Democrats feared that in a primary where more Republican voters come out than Democrat voters traditionally.
Especially this year when California might be in play with the crowded Republican field.
Exactly.
At the top.
That Barbara Bree, the Democrat, was in danger of losing to Ray Ellis in a head-to-head battle in June, but that she would fare better in November. And so to add in three new candidates increases the odds very much that it goes to November to give Bree a chance to go against Ellis with an electorate that's much more left-leaning, I guess.
Yeah, more time to campaign, more name recognition, and as you say, maybe the bigger Democratic turnout in November. Very, very interesting stuff. Just for fun here, Sherri Lightner staffer you mentioned is running, and so's her husband. Who does she endorse?
She endorsed her husband.
Okay, she already has done that.
Yes,
okay.
she has.
No offense, staffer, but we got to go with the spouse. Yeah.
Right, but the name recognition that her husband Lightner has, you have to figure that folks go into the polls in June. If they see Lightner and they like Sherri, they might give him enough votes just based on that last name to push it into a runoff and prevent Ellis from getting 50% that he needs to avoid a runoff.
Okay. Now, when you get there, again, the runoff is just the top two. So some of these folks naturally are going to fall by the way. Three of them are going to fall by the wayside here before we get to all of that. Now, let's get to the council itself. Nominally, it's not a partisan race. It shouldn't be considering ourselves as Democrats, Republicans, but in the real world, we certainly do.
Yes, I mean, it doesn't say D or R on the ballot when you vote, but a lot of folks who follow it know this, and if you cover City Hall as I do, I mean, you see that there are a lot of issues that fall on partisan lines. Minimum wage would be a great example. The council approved the minimum wage increase on party line directly, and climate action plan, a lot of other issues like that. While they approved that unanimously, a lot of folks believe that the climate action plan might not have been as aggressive if the Republicans had controlled the council instead of the Democrats.
I see. And we go back just a couple of years here, and it was a pretty big Democratic stronghold. We should point out that several years ago, the registration of Democrats far surpassed the Republicans in the city of San Diego, which had never been the case for decades here. But go back a few years, we had Bob Filner as a Democratic mayor. He had a super majority of Democrats on the council. All that's changed now, right?
Right. Well, it's still, if they still have a tenuous 5-4 majority, and this is the key race that's in question. If you look at the other races that are up for election, it doesn't appear there'll be a party switch. Possible, but unlikely. This is one where Lightner's held it in close elections in 2008 and 12, and so now there's a question whether she, that Bree can beat Ellis. If Ellis wins, it flips and it's 5-4 Republicans, and you have a Republican mayor, Kevin Faulconer. So then the Republicans would have complete control.
And that's, as we say, quite a different change. And of course, it wouldn't go with the registration of, it's no longer really a Republican city, but there you'd have it.
No, you're right. It's about 3-2 Democrats, Republicans. On the other hand, there are a lot of decline to state voters, more and more every day. But you're right. Of the folks who say what their party is, Democrats are outnumbering Republicans in the city and in District 1, the one we're talking about.
Right. So that talks about agenda, and as you're saying, various issues that come up along party lines. Suddenly, the emphasis and the what's given priority down at City Hall completely shifts with this shift. So this is a critical race here. Very interesting. Too early to handicap? Is it likely to be a runoff because of all these?
Yeah, I have to say, just using math, you know what I mean? When you have 5, the chances of a run-up always are going to go up. But if you point, because of Lightner's name recognition, right? Because his wife has the same last name and she's represented the district for 8 years, and because Rodolico is going to get a lot of voters who feel strongly about the Regents Bridge. He is for that bridge, and Bree and Ellis are both against it.
Right.
And so if you're a one, and that matters to these people quite a bit. And so if you get 500, 800, 1,000, I don't know, people going out to vote for him, that obviously makes just mathematically it harder for Ellis to get to the 50% magic number.
Okay.
Why is that bridge such a sticking point for voters?
It's a sticking point within University City. Some folks want it because it will improve traffic flow and make the community much better. Other folks don't want it because of property value concerns and other issues. It's been a long, complicated sticking point. It's actually not a done deal yet. Now, a lot of folks thought it was taken off the table because some folks announced that it was, but there's actually, the city is still studying it. There's supposed to be an EIR, I think, later this year, so it may actually be back. So it's not just an old issue that's being dredged back up. It's actually an issue that's going to get decided sometime down the road.
And council members are powerful in these kinds of issues, whether they're for or against something, an issue, a project like this, it can really swing it one way or the other.
And I'm wondering if there are certain issues or matters that it would swing if Ray Ellis were elected in this district. Is there something that we know would happen if Republicans had control of the council?
It's an interesting question. If Faulconer's reelected in particular, he'll have a much easier time with his agenda with 5-4 council. So you don't know what bold ideas he has that he hasn't put forward based on the fact that he's facing a 5-4 Democratic majority. I don't know. I mean, managed competition is an issue that's come up. Labor unions don't like that. It's the privatization of, there might be more privatization. It's hard to speculate, but there could be a lot of sort of more right-leaning ideas and policies that Faulconer could pursue with a 5-4 majority of Republicans. Okay,
a few seconds left. I did want to talk about that mayor's race here. We have 2 liberals, Ed Harris, Lori Saldana, now taking on the Republican. A little while ago, he didn't seem to have anybody taking him on. The strategy there is the same thing as to force a runoff and get to November?
It appears to be. It seems like the big question is whether Ed Harris is going to get labor support. If he does, I guess there's a chance. I still feel like the mayor's awfully popular, and it's going to be a right-leaning electorate in June, and I still think it's unlikely he's forced into runoff. But if Harris gets labor backing, and then Saldana will be popular with Latino voters, and she was an assemblywoman,
maybe
so she's
he doesn't
legitimate.
Get 50+1,
and then in November, I guess if something happens, the stadium issue becomes a thorn in his side. Still seems like a long shot.
Yeah, it sure does. All right, we will move on. For months, the news has been dominated by presidential politics, particularly on the Republican side. Donald Trump and Ted Cruz, detested by many in their own party, are the unlikely top 2 contenders. Meanwhile, the Democrats could nominate America's first woman candidate or a 74-year-old avowed Democratic socialist. If all that's enough to excite voters this year, I don't know what else would be, Megan, but maybe not if history is a guide, because in 2014, California turnout was absolutely abysmal. And let's start right there. What was the turnout statewide in our most recent election?
For the general election in November, it was 42.2%, I believe.
Okay, and as we say, that just is not.
And that was a
encouraging.
record low for the state.
That's just of registered voters, not actually of eligible voters, right? People who could be registered and aren't.
Right. So nobody turned. And again, that was a midterm, but a lot of things were at stake. And at stake in the state, propositions, of course, in elected office. Congress is elected every 2 years. All of that's at stake, and people just don't turn out. Well, that's what we're going to talk about here. Your story this week notes turnout especially low among residents who were foreign-born. How low are we talking about there?
So for residents who are foreign-born, and that can encompass refugees, it can encompass people who chose to travel here maybe for for work, people who are in the country, maybe on a green card, that sort of thing. Turnout among those people was 32%. And then that's compared to the U.S.-born electorate at 46% of those people turned out to vote.
Okay, so quite a bit lower. Yet among this low turnout group, there is this segment called the super voters. Who are super voters?
Right. So super voters are, it kind of varies depending on who's doing the research, but it's people who vote in nearly every election. So 8 to 9 out of every 10 elections they voted. Some people look at maybe 4 or 5 out of 6.
But they vote quite a lot. They're usually there.
Yeah, they're usually there. And so in California, the percentage of voters who are super voters is 20%. But what this group in City Heights, the Partnership for the Advancement of New Americans, is looking at is the percentage of super voters among East African refugees here in San Diego. So it's kind of a small subsection, but they've noticed that in that group, super voters account for 30% of the voters. So that sort of a light bulb went off for them, and they thought, if we could get refugees out to vote, maybe there'll be a bunch of super voters and they can really, have a voice at the polls.
Okay, and get this underrepresented segment out at the polls. And that's that. It's not this project to get the folks out. It's not to determine it one way or the other. It's just to engage people politically and get them involved in our democratic process.
It's just to engage them politically, but refugees and foreign-born residents tend to be Democratic. At least in City Heights, the people I've talked to tend to be Democrats.
Okay, Mario?
So what do we know about the majority of super voters? Are they, demographically, do they share anything in common? Or
so if you look at super voters
overall,
I believe it's around our 40% Republican, about between 30 and 40% make $100,000 or more a year. Latinos make up a very small percentage of super voters. So you can look at super voters kind of the way that, and assume the things that we know about mail-in voters tend to be older, wealthier, and white.
Okay. This week you talked to, I got a couple of bites here I want to play. This week you talked to 2 women. They both live in the City Heights neighborhood of Peralta. I'm pronouncing that right. They have very different relationship to voting. First, let's hear from Noreen H. Green.
Young black men and women being killed, and there really have been no consequences for that. The fact that you have to have millions, sometimes $1 billion to even run for president. So I don't vote because I don't believe anyone deserves my vote.
All right, now we're going to go to Peralta resident Mariam Ali.
I don't vote. Who knows me? Who knows my needs? No one.
All right, so those opposite points of view, same neighborhood here, but
same street, too.
Same street, but very different approach to voting, and they both seem abreast of the news and aware of current events, even the non-voter.
Yeah, the director of the Partnership for Advancement of New Americans talked a little bit about this. She says that refugees come from a place where they had very little say in the decision making, if any. So in the case of Mariam Ali, she had to flee her home before she could vote. The president that she would have supported was overturned, and then she lived for a couple of years in a refugee camp where there was no civic structure whatsoever. So she arrives in the U.S., becomes a citizen in 2003, and she's excited to have a say because she has it for most of her adult life.
Yeah, this is a very important thing to her. I can see that. Now, of these refugees and statewide, how big a population are we talking about?
Well, statewide, we've resettled about 300,000 refugees since the 1980s. And here locally, the number kind of varies between 70,000 and 100,000 since 1975.
All right. Now, we heard from those 2 women on the same street. You talked to some other folks who talked to you about why they vote or why they don't vote. What are some of the trends there?
So for people who do vote, they want to have a say. They recognize that if you want to ask for something from your leaders, you should probably be able to show them that you voted. They want to say in just, the way that their streets look, whether or not their sidewalks are crumbling. They also care a lot about racial inequality, about some of the policing issues that people have been talking about in the past couple of years. So that's what gets them out to vote. Also the minimum wage measure. For people who don't vote, it's a mixture. It's people who don't have the time or the wherewithal to vote because they're working 2 jobs and they take the bus to each, and the bus is 15 minutes late, and it just doesn't make sense for them to get to the polls that day. But there are also people like Noreen Green who are just kind of fed up with the system. They're fed up with the politics that we're kind of probably seeing in District 1, and they think that there's another way to create change. So with Noreen, you know, she might sound quote unquote radical, but she actually, you know, organizes people in the community and tries to create change through that way, through empowering those people.
David?
You seem to also mention, you know, money in politics, at least on the presidential level, but I'm not sure she's aware of it. There's a lot of money in politics on the local level too, and I think sometimes when I talk to people, there's a lot of people who it's apathy, but there's a lot of other people who are frustrated that there's moneyed interests that control things, and they feel like that their vote doesn't matter.
And that's what Trump and Sanders, of course, are talking about nationally in very different ways, is the money and the corruption and how much it fuels, and our bite from our one voter there, too.
I asked her if there were any circumstances under which she would vote, and she said, well, the system would have to look radically different. And I said, well, would you vote if, say, in November, it was Bernie versus Trump? And she said no, because those races, especially the Trump, just show that it's a circus. I can't do it.
All right, well, we will have to leave it there. We'll see what happens when the voting really starts counting in California. That does wrap up another week of stories at the KPBS Roundtable. I'd like to thank my guests, Mario Coran of Voice of San Diego, David Garrick of the San Diego Union Tribune, and Megan Burks of KPBS News. A reminder, all the stories we discussed today are available on our website, kpbs.org. I'm Mark Sauer. Thanks for joining us today on the Roundtable.